Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to The Cutting Room, the show where we talk to advanced content marketers about their ideas, philosophies, and pregame behind content marketing. I'm your host, Tommy Walker, and I'm very excited to have our guest on today, Jimmy Daly. He is the founder or co-founder of Superpath, an advanced or content marketing community and training platform for advanced content marketers and looking to help people advance their career. One of the things I'm really excited about with Jimmy, I've known Jimmy for a very long time, and I've learned a lot from him both through conversation and example. And I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. I would encourage you to, I know we don't have too many people live right now, but I would love it if anybody here could introduce themselves in the chat and let us know a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and take the time, give a little bit of self-promotion. Why not? And as we're going along today, please feel free to, on Twitter, tweet some interesting things that you hear Jimmy say with the hashtag The Cutting Room with a link back. We're going to be having a call to action at the bottom here that will have tweetable moments throughout. So without any further ado, I'm going to invite Jimmy over to the show, and we're just going to jump right in. Jimmy, come on. There we go. What's happening, Jimmy?
Not much, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. I think I butchered the introduction to Superpath. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at Superpath in a more concise and probably accurate way of describing what you guys are doing?
I'll do my best. I feel like we have a lot of things going on right now. Superpath at its core is a free community for content marketers. In many ways, it acts like a professional association. Like we're very much like the content marketers advocate. The community stuff, as I mentioned, completely free. We have like 5,000 folks in there. It's a great place to come ask questions, learn, meet other folks. We do hangouts, like lots of sort of opportunity to connect with other people there. And then we have a few ways that we earn revenue. We have a paid membership. We have a job board. More recently, we have a marketplace where we match up writers with companies who need content. So lots going on. Like I say, overarching goals are provide people with great advice for their own careers, and then two, help people find good work, whether that would be freelance clients or full-time jobs or whatever, but like making those connections where both parties win and you get paid.
And what I love about Superpath is that it's really geared more towards the mid-career content marketing folk, which is increasingly difficult. It's very difficult to find a community of people who aren't in that beginner level. So there's a lot of really great conversation that's happening in there that's like beyond valuable. I've been doing this for a long time, and I still find it incredibly valuable every time I participate in the conversations over there. So
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's funny. Like most of the really good threads we have are something along the lines of like, I've been tasked with this objective. My budget is X. My manager isn't completely sold on the idea, and it's like, it's like, that's how it plays out in the real world. It's never as simple as like, how many words should this blog post be? And so,
right.
I like opening that curtain and letting people see, like, if you're going to grow your career in this field, like this is the kind of stuff you have to be able to navigate.
Yeah, I think that's the part where it's way more of an honest conversation, especially for people who are in-house in a lot of those cases.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're going to kick it right off. I'm going to ask my first question here, which is, what are some of your philosophies behind content marketing, and what role do you believe it can play within an organization? Or even growing an organization if you're starting from scratch, which I know you have a lot of experience doing here.
Yeah, I feel like the answer is kind of the same thing in both cases. It's like, I think that the main role for content marketing should be to establish trust with an audience. I find that, there's so many different approaches you could take to content. There's like, you can chase keywords around, you can do thought leadership content, you can create sales enablement stuff, like, and all of that is useful. But only if you sort of look at it through this lens of like, can we reach these people and establish some type of trust with them so that when the time comes for that person or company to make a buying decision, that we are top of mind. You can point to so many different examples of this. I can tell you that I wrote blog posts for the animals blog for a few years and still occasionally get emails back that are like, hey, I read this blog post you wrote like 4 or 5 years ago, and you probably don't even know this, but we've since signed up. We're an animals customer. Like this piece had an impact on the content strategy we ultimately pursued, and this is how it went. And I'm like, I'm always sort of blown away, even though like that was the intention all along, was to help people make good decisions and establish ourselves as a trustworthy resource for that kind of stuff. It still surprises me all the time. So like then within the organization, I feel like why it's kind of the same exact answer is like, for most companies, content marketing is your primary touch point with potential customers. Kind of leaning on that animals experience again, like COVID hits March 2020. Most of the companies that we were working with, they didn't have PR teams. They don't have communications teams. They have content marketing. It's like the only way that they already had sort of set up and ready to go to communicate with people. Now that's sort of like this outlier extreme use case where content just becomes like unbelievably important. But like that plays out in so many ways on a day-to-day basis at companies. Like folks are interacting with, blog content or drip campaigns or social or kind of whatever other form that content takes. And it can be a slow burn. Like it doesn't necessarily turn folks into customers immediately, but that trust piece, I always come back to that because like that's the thing that gets people buying over time.
I love that. And so where would you start? Like you've built programs before. I've known this. I've co-built a program with you when we were both doing QuickBooks together. Where do you start? Like, what's your research process looking like towards the beginning, and then continually speaking? It's not even necessarily just the beginning and the starting process, but like, what's that cycle look like for research and development of that audience?
Yeah, such a good question. I hate to lead with it depends, but it sort of depends. Like, I guess there's a few things come to mind. One is like, is this a brand new company and you're starting content literally from scratch? Because that's sort of, I could tell you like what I think a playbook should look like there, because there's just fewer factors. But more often the way that this takes shape is that, you're a content lead, you're coming into a role. Maybe a few people have run that blog before you. Maybe your manager has whatever expectations or was displeased with the previous content strategy. And like, you're kind of walking into a little bit of a mess. Like I've actually never known anyone that walked into a new content lead role and it wasn't kind of a mess.
Right.
So then at that point, like you're sort of just getting your footing, trying to understand like, okay, where are we right now? What assets do I currently have at my disposal? And once you get that footing, you'd probably start going through the same process that a brand new company would go through. So like the way that I would think about that process is, number one, how does this company acquire customers? Like what is the business model? Because that can tell you a lot about how the content strategy should be developed. So like, let's say, for example, the company leans heavily on product-led growth and they're driving customers towards a freemium model or a free trial. Like that basically dictates what you have to do with content, because sales isn't really a factor. Like you're going to have to reach quite a few people. So like volume is a consideration. You're going to need to be able to scale your content operation to create enough content for it to have the impact that you need it to have, versus the company, whether it's brand new or, 20 years old, say it's an enterprise software company. There's a team of account managers and SDRs that rely heavily on content for their sales work, right? So that paints a whole different picture, right? Like, do you need SEO? You might not need it at all. I don't know. Like you definitely need to flesh out your bottom of the funnel. You need to make sure that you have lots of good lead gen assets. You probably want to do a quick audit of whatever emails the sales folks are sending out. So that would kind of be my starting point, is like figure out where the customers actually enter, and then kind of take a few steps back to figure out like where can content be most impactful. And definitely don't do the thing which I have done in my career and certainly seen other people do, which is just like, no matter what the business is, just like chase keywords. Like there is a time and place for that, but that's not like a blanket strategy.
I'm curious about that too, because keywords are like a big thing, and we've got a couple different camps in the content marketing space now, where Google is dead, and trying to go after that. I quote Ryan Law over at Animals quite a bit, where he talks about Google is like looking into the night sky, and what you see in Google now doesn't. Like it's such a
Yeah.
such a good quote, right? What you see now was working 10 years ago. It's not what works now. Like, where do you fall in that sort of? I have an idea of this, but where do you fall in that part of the conversation? Like, is it still worth chasing key phrases and going after that, or should we be looking at alternative channels now?
Both. I get, yeah, both. And again, it sort of depends. But I guess, okay, here's an example. I literally just earlier today on the phone with one of our marketplace customers, and they have a tool. They have a template library, and they're trying to figure out like, you know, we have 50 templates. What do we do to start getting search traffic for these templates? And I feel like in that situation, product-led growth company, uh, templates are like a very natural entry point into this product. Yeah, I think SEO is an awesome play. But as long as you set the expectation that it doesn't deliver tomorrow, then like let's start building out that content. I think it's a great idea. You know, contrast that with, animals is. I was going to say it's not an outlier, but like agencies are sort of their own beast. But when we started the animals blog, January 2018, we thought a lot about where does SEO fit into our strategy, and ultimately decided it doesn't. Maybe in a few years it will, but for now, it doesn't really have a place. Like it would make a lot more sense for us to do what we ultimately called bottom of the funnel thought leadership, which is kind of its own little thing that we came up with. But to like voice our opinions, establish our philosophy, kind of plant our flag in the territory that we wanted to kind of slowly call ours. And along the way, build up an email list. That was a very important part of that, was building up the email list. And that worked fantastically. So, again, I feel like it comes, agencies, very low volume businesses. That's an important note there. You do not need hundreds or thousands of trials per month. You just need 2, 3, 4 customers in a month, and you're doing great. And so the volume requirements for sales, in that situation, I feel like we nailed that. Like we hit the right tone with the right strategy, paired it up nicely with our customer acquisition plan, and we're able to bring in more leads than we could handle. In some ways, I actually think that's easier because the volume is low. Like for folks who are leading teams, maybe at a SaaS company, especially with free trial or freemium offerings, like you've really got your work cut out for you. I feel like SEO just has to play a role because you just have to reach thousands or tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people on a monthly basis in order to make the whole thing work.
That's awesome. I want to talk about animals for a little bit too, because animals as an agency has become sort of like known for, they are the content marketing agency, right? Like you say animals to anybody, or you say content marketing agency to anyone, and now it's like that animals, like everybody knows it. How did that work, right? Because that's something that people are going to search for, but where's that connection between the bottom of the funnel thought leadership there, which I love because I love reading the animals blog. You always get perspective and insights, which is increasingly difficult to find in general. But like, talk about that. Like, how does that content carry itself? How were you able to bring it to market? All of that, get it in front of the right people if you're not going after that search volume.
That's a great question. I think that there was a few things that happened early on that helped quite a bit. And to be completely honest, the first one was a very well networked founder. That helped a lot because what happened was the first kind of batch of customers that Animals had, like I'm talking within the first like 3 to 6 months of the company, were big names, like really good names. And we started collecting case studies and hands-on experience with these sort of high-profile companies from day one. And it gave us enormous confidence, for one thing. But two, forced us to be very introspective and to think very carefully about the work that we did for those folks. I think in many ways that set the tone for all the things that came later on. So Animals existed for 2.5 years, I think, before it even had a website, just nothing. So like we were we were forced to rely on our reputation in order to get new customers because word of mouth was really all we had.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Honestly, that was not a problem. Like we still were able to get enough business. Like when we launched the blog, it was more like an insurance policy on the future than solving a current problem. We just figured like this word of mouth thing is probably going to drive eventually. Like we should have something else going. Um, but because we had spent 2.5 years being very introspective about the work we were doing, we felt like we had alpha data. Like
Mm-hmm.
we were the source. We didn't have to rely on anybody else. We didn't have to hire a research firm. We didn't have to go Google a bunch of stuff to get examples from other people. Like we had the examples, we had the experience, and I think it made us feel very empowered as we started the blog and started publishing this thought leadership content, because we knew for a fact that we had some of the best experience out there. It was simply a matter of like capturing it in a way
Mm-hmm.
that was interesting to people. But again, it's a content agency. Like we've got a process for that. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
we would run our stuff through the same process that we ran anybody else's content through. So yeah, I guess a couple things just sort of came together. And then, one of my favorite things about running a blog, I don't know if you've experienced this, but like, I get a high from publishing stuff that people like. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the
Yep.
best feeling in the world. It's like one of the reasons I was initially attracted to content marketing, and one of the reasons I still enjoy like working in this field now is like the dopamine hit you get when you write something that resonates with people. And like we got that pretty quickly on the Animals blog, and that fueled us. Like we were once we recognized like we could take this sort of quiet but very good reputation we had and build it into something bigger and more powerful. Like we were sort
Mm-hmm.
of all in and just ran after it.
I'm curious because and I'm going to take it back a little bit further. So we've got this really introspective approach when it comes to animals. Before that, you've had a really great career yourself. Before that, you were at QuickBooks. Before that, you were at Vero. How did all of that experience? Because you've got a variety of background there. You've got software, you've got big enterprise experience, and then you go into an agency. Like, how does that all carry over? Like, what's the common thread there, and
Hmm.
how has that shaped your perspective on just how you approach anything that you're doing, anything you're putting out there?
That's so interesting. That's so interesting. I don't know that I have a great answer to that. I guess a few things. It's like as part of let's see, before Vero there was an agency.
Yeah.
And one of the things I liked about that agency was that I just had the chance to work on different accounts and work with different people and experience different problems. And I sort of like that. And then I go to Vero and I kind of like zoom in on this one thing. It's like
Mm-hmm.
transactional email, no sales team, self-serve product. SEO is really important, and um, just had the opportunity to like go really deep on this one thing. But what I found was a few years later, I was like, I kind of want to zoom back out, and that's when I went to Animals for the first time. I worked there 2 different times, and
Right.
had that experience again of like, okay, many companies, many problems. How do we solve these things? It's kind of exciting then to like zoom back out and do this. And then I zoomed back in, and when I went to QuickBooks, a job that you got for me, and had this fantastic experience of like working at a scale that I had never experienced before. Like Intuit is a gigantic company.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself like feeling like very green, like trying to figure out this world. And then, sort of same thing happened. Zoom back out, went to, so, I guess to me, the pattern is just like, um, following my, like kind of my interest, you know what I mean? To
Mm-hmm.
stay fresh with all of it. Like I never really wanted to be like the B2B transactional email content marketer.
Right.
You know what I mean? I wanted to be like the content guy. And so like I felt that I needed to kind of dabble in a few different things to do that. And now Superpath is like a whole different thing. I'm trying to figure out how that all works. Um, but I feel like that kind of mixing it up actually is great. Like it helps a lot.
I'm going to ask you one that I haven't asked anybody yet. How do you develop taste?
Mm. Uh, I think two things come to mind. One is just reading a lot,
Mm-hmm.
like by reading a lot, you start to understand your own preferences better. And as you find yourself attracted to a piece of writing, you can start analyzing why, right? So, like, I would say like a lot of my like mid to late 20s was spent reading not just B2B SaaS content marketing stuff, but uh, novels, investigative journalism, poetry,
Hmm.
like just trying to find things I liked from each of those different genres and then bringing them into content marketing. I think the other thing though is um, having an editor that will absolutely beat the crap out of your ideas. And for me, that was Walter Chen, who started Animals. Like, his I've never met someone um, sort of more blunt with their feedback, and so uh, I would write stuff like early in Animals. I was doing like client work, right? Like small team, like you just are chipping in where you can, and he would just absolutely beat the crap out of the stuff that I would write. And what I sort of over time took away from that was that um, if you're going to write something and present it as a great piece of work, uh, you better have thought through every possible way that the reader could develop skepticism as they're reading that piece. So he would read everything I wrote with this like incredibly skeptical eye, as if I had no idea what I was talking about. And then at the end of it, we would sort of solve all these little problems, and then we'd have this like kind of polished argument, you know. Um, and I felt like after going through that for like 2 years, I felt like I already knew what he was going to say when I would
Hmm.
send him a piece to look at, and then I could just start solving that stuff on my own. And I feel like that was super important for me because it helped me develop a style that it kind of feels like, me. It feels like
Yours.
it's really me. Um, yeah, but honestly, so yeah, both those things. But really, I can't stress enough, like just reading a lot of stuff and not all. Actually, probably mostly not content marketing, because
It's funny.
like the range is just so much narrower. Like when you kind of label it that way.
I find a lot of my education, some of my best stuff comes from like screenwriting, right? My background has been in like screen and television and film and whatnot, and looking at how those stories play out and how a script is dissected and all of that has always been really interesting to me. You bring something up though that's really interesting, and you're talking about your editor developing you as a developer or as an editor. How are you going about developing your writers? I always have this
Yeah, that's
interesting theory on that. You're the first reader, so like, how do you develop your writers? Yeah.
I think that I don't know if I'm a good editor. Like, yeah, I don't,
Oh, stop it.
because I don't practice it professionally. It's just like I feel like in doing so many different content things over time, I feel like I've developed a sense for what's good and what's not. So I
Hmm.
try to approach it more from the perspective of like, I want to help this writer not just make this piece better, but just think more broadly about uh, the company that they work for, the industry that that company exists within, and the huge, gigantic world that the reader lives in, where this is just like the tiniest little sliver of their day, And I feel like I edit from that perspective because I feel like it's just the best way that I can sort of provide value to that writer. Like in being edited by Walter, he would often tell me like, or sort of get at this theme of like, you know, if you want to grow your career, if you want to lead a team, if you want to be a VP here at Animals, if you want to one day run your own company, you can't be thinking about this line by line stuff. Like you have to learn how to develop a great idea, beat the crap out of the idea, and then the writing becomes very easy once you've done that.
Hmm.
And so, like to me, that's writing coaching. It's like helping me become a better writer, further my own career, et cetera, et cetera. So I try to kind of apply that same kind of rigor to the stuff that I edit. I don't think I'm as good at it as Walter because um, uh, there were times where like I'm too sensitive. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, so I'm like I wouldn't say it in the way that he might. um, but yeah, I think that thinking like a lot bigger about the work is so valuable to the writer and for the reader, more importantly.
It's a very intimate relationship too you have between editor and author, right? I've always tried to think about it in that term where it's like I'm your first reader,
Yeah.
and I have to consider your feelings, and at the same time really try to let the work be the work, um and really try to understand both the internal process with the person, right, and where they're at, not just as what's happening on the page, but as them investing in them as a person, because
Yeah,
you're seeing a little piece of themselves. You're seeing like how they are interpreting whatever they've got, right? And
totally.
talk about Walter with the big ideas. Like sometimes you got to tell people, man, your big idea sucks, right? Or
Yeah,
you got to apply
totally.
pressure to it.
Totally. One other thing that Walter did quite a bit was that I would send him an article and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And he would read it and say, "Let's jump on a call and talk about it."
Yeah,
Instead of blowing it up with comments, because when you as the writer then open up your doc and see 100 comments, and it's just like it's so deflating, But
yeah,
if you can jump on a call and say, and the editor, in this case Walter, would say like, "Why do you feel like this is an important thing to write about?" Or what value is the reader supposed to take away from this? Or why did you choose this example instead of something different? And it sort of makes you like really think about those decisions rather than what oftentimes happens in comments is you're just resolving things. Say,
hmm
okay, I'll tweak this whole thing so that I can check the box to make it go away. That then you're iterating, not really improving.
That's really important to talk about even more. Like I would love it if you could dig into that just a little bit more before we get into the actual edit.
Yeah.
Like that one-on-one, like going beyond the line edits. What's the bigger picture? Like how has that allowed you to apply pressure to your own ideas, but then also help other people apply that pressure to their ideas?
Yeah. I guess I, I feel like I just constantly cite animals examples, but there's just
It's
so
a great
many of
agency.
them.
So
Yeah, there's just
yeah.
I so many things to talk through. So like, um, I sent Walter a version of an article I wrote, and it was what the article now is called your blog is not a publication. And I sent him this sort of half baked idea where I was trying to get at like, you know, the way that your site is structured has all these trickle down effects that I was sort of positing were negative for the most part. But it wasn't, there was not a single sentence that there wasn't like a soundbite. You know what I mean?
hmm
Like you kind of had to read the whole article and be like, I think I get it. And his feedback to me was like, write one sentence that captures this entire thing. Just do that, and then the rest of the article is just going to like flow out of you. But it was really hard to get to that one sentence. And so that to me that was like him saying like, you have something here, you have maybe the kind of beginnings of an interesting theory that people probably will be into, but you're just presenting it in such a discombobulated way. um,
Mm.
so I actually found myself offering that same advice to writers that I would work with at Animals and other places where I would say like, okay, I'm not going to even read these 1,500 words until you can explain to me in a single sentence what this article is about. Because if you can't do that, I don't care. Like, I don't want to read this article. Um, so I find myself doing that a lot. I try to be, like as an editor, I find like you got to be tactful. You have to sort of explain like if you're going to ask someone to do that, you have to explain why. Like what is the purpose of this exercise, which sometimes feels like a deviation from the process. The articles do it in 2 days or whatever. Like we don't want to get off of our timeline. But I feel like that's a really helpful way to force people to think about their ideas. One other thing I would add is that applies primarily in the context of thought leadership, where the idea is the article.
hmm
Like most good thought leadership articles, you can read the headline and you're like, oh, I think I know what this is about, but I'm still intrigued enough to go read it. Whereas like SEO is kind of a different beast. Like it doesn't really rely on the hook in the same way that a thought leadership piece would. So you might end up like needing a different exercise to have like the same like growth effect on the writer if you're talking about
Yep.
thought or SEO or sales enablement or case studies or whatever else.
Yeah, the premise of a piece that's, and by the way, that piece in particular made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and like I got really tense about it because I'm always talking about blogs being publications and treating it as such. So when I saw that headline, I had to click, and then I had to get mad at you, which was like awesome because it's actually a visceral emotional reaction, which is more than you normally get in it. I couldn't even tell you what the last article I read was. So that's one that stands out and is memorable to me, which is kind of the point, right? That's what we're talking about overall.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. To do like, yeah, your piece really made me mad. No, it was good though. It was that's the thing that I loved about it. Let's see. So Grace says here to all the heart to all the editors beating the crap out of you. Yeah, I think that's there's you got to be no more Mr. Nice editor, right? Like I think the tougher an editor can be, the better off the author is going to be in the long run. How do you develop that, right? How do you develop that ability to have blunt feedback? One, and then two, let's jump into the piece after this.
Yeah, I think it just takes time. You have to earn the trust. Like I think the editor, it's primarily on the editor. It's sort of their burden to carry to develop trust with the folks that they edit for. Because, writing feels personal. It's your work. It's your words. It doesn't always feel great to have someone criticizing it. Yeah, it's true. When it stings, it's working. Yeah, no, it's definitely true. I feel like one thing at least I try to do as an editor is, and actually I had to learn this. It did not happen naturally, is to empower the writer's voice. Like one thing in my early days of Animals, I found myself doing this thing where I would take an article that someone else wrote and I would just kind of like make it sound more like I wrote it, because I felt like I knew where this piece should go. That's a way to develop a really crappy relationship with your editor, where you feel like they're just manipulating the pieces, and the goal is to make the writer the hero, right? Empower them to like spread their wings and fly, and like the editor, I think, is kind of in the background, sort of like just cheering them on, but not really taking credit for the work. So I think that's really important.
That was probably the hardest part for me when I was a young editor, and then as I developed a little bit further, I was actually just working with a junior editor recently, and that was the biggest thing, was saying, this isn't your piece, right? You have to really let this person shine through and ask better questions than it is like doing line by line edits. And I think it goes back to what you were saying before about thinking about the bigger picture here, which I love. Now, we're going to switch gears here. We're going to get into the edit itself. I really appreciate this. We had some audience feedback in the last few episodes where we would love to have that sort of live edit happen independently, which you've done. So anybody who's watching this right now, you can actually look over Jimmy's shoulder as he's going through this piece line by line, which is absolutely incredible. Like, I learned a lot just seeing you go through your process. But what I want to do right now is kind of go through and walk through some of those high-level edits, and where your head was at when you were doing that. Do you have the piece up right now, or you want me? I need to have it up? I already have it up. So.
Oh, if you have it, yeah. I do not have it up right now. Sorry, I should have had that.
That's all right. No worries. Let's see. Okay, so this is a piece by Jason Quay. He's working with Growth Ramp right now. Really cool company, what they're up to. And we can see here that the article is about price increase, how to do SaaS pricing change in 8 steps. All right, I'm just going to kick it right back over to you, Jimmy. First things first, what was your first piece of feedback here?
Give me 10 titles. I find that even if we're getting very close to publishing an article, I still I don't think that the title should be finalized until like the very last second, because I think you just need time. I think you need the time to like be going through the piece, improving it, working with the editor, etc., and kind of in your head sort of like playing around with different ways you might approach the title, kind of based on what you're learning by improving the article. So the first thing I said was like, just give me 10 more titles. We're not settling on title yet, so give me 10, because I want the writer to be thinking more sort of holistically about how we're going to present this piece to the writer. So, you know, the way that Jason did it, which is like basically like keyword subtitle sort of, you know, is one way to do it. But I would like to see other variations. Like maybe one variation is like leading with the number. You know, another variation would be like pull a piece of data, and there was a really good piece of data about a price increase driving ARR up 28%. Like lead with that potentially. Let's play around with a few headlines that could also work as tweets, for example, like where you sort of make the important statement right within the headline, or like let's even just play around with some like totally clickbait titles, like yeah, we did it. You know, we raised prices for pod page, and you won't believe what happened next. Like I don't care, but just like get the creative juices flowing because it'll help us land on something better.
Yep. And in your edit too, when you were going through it, at what point in the process are you talking about writing those headlines?
I'm always kind of looking for, I guess, what I would call a soundbite. You know, like the one sentence, and I'm like, that's the thing. You know, like the whole article is about this, but you've sort of buried it in the fourth paragraph. I'm always kind of like trying to keep an eye out for that kind of thing. Um, so that's kind of why I like doing the title later on, is because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you just like if you settle on it too early. We have this idea at Animals that we would call, they wrote an article about this too, about high concept versus low concept writing. Low concept writing is like uh what is content marketing? You know, it's like there is not really a strong concept there. It's purely informational versus high concept, where it's basically like you're revealing your cards in the title itself. So like a beautiful example of this is an article. There's an article that Heaton Shaw wrote called something like why Trello failed to become a billion-dollar company or something. And it's just like, whoa, okay, like this sets the tone. It frames the idea. Like it does so much work all kind of up front. So I think that it's probably better to sort of veer more towards that high concept writing where like super strong concept, present it up front, get people's attention, you know, and then it can still be an SEO article versus kind of what I see in a lot of SEO content. And I would say it not completely, but this is sort of like on the spectrum of low concept, which is just like kind of bland statement with keywords, because then you put such an onus on the writing to capture the reader. And I think it should usually be in the reverse order.
I think what's interesting about that too is, and I know this has happened when I write, but also I've seen this with other writers too, is that we forget that the headline is for the audience, right? For the rest of the people. And when we write, or when we're writing these pieces, and when we're seeing these pieces and we're editing, it's us, it's you and me, right? Like it's just the two of us on one side of the screen and the other. And it's a very intimate thing that we're doing. But when we're putting the headline out there, it's to catch attention in this giant sea of whatever it is that's out there.
Yeah.
And I think we as editors can do a huge disservice if we forget that part, right? And forget to remind our writers of that part. And I know a lot of people. I mean, I was talking about this with Aaron last week, Aaron Orendorff last week, and he was talking about how he also asked for 5 to 10 headlines every single time, because it gets your juices going, but it's a reminder that you're trying to grab attention, like you're trying to get people to spend time with this.
Totally. And I feel like also because of this world we live in now, where you can run every piece of content through a content optimization tool, and it will tell you, it will give you a score or a grade. You get an A minus, or you get a 95 or whatever, and then it will show you these places to improve. And I feel like I'm not saying that that's what Jason did in this piece, but I feel like it's kind of made us a little lazy, you know, because you can write this article, plug it into a tool, and be like, look at all the boxes I checked, you know, but without ever kind of putting it up against its most rigorous test, which is, does anyone actually care?
Right. I've seen this too, and we'll move on in the edit here in just a second. But I've seen this with YouTube, just completely kind of a different context, but same idea. We're still talking about content marketing, right? Let's see. I gotta actually unfocused. How does this work? Oh no. I've seen this with technical issues, folks. I've seen this with YouTube where people will take their thumbnail and their headline and actually mock up what it would look like in the recommended section. Just
interesting.
to, yeah. So it's, I mean, YouTube's also content marketing, right? Like if we're doing a
Yeah.
content marketing channel, they will mock all of that up so they can see what it would look like in a feed and what it would look like compared to other things that are out there. And I thought that was a brilliant sort of strategy that people are doing because it's not all retroactive. It's actually super proactive, and you can sort of test against yourself right now on what things are going to look like in your feed. So
I love that.
just a
That's
little,
really cool.
yeah, just a little suggestion, little tip there for folks. All right. Moving on here, we've got the main headline. We talked about headlines quite a bit here. Let's talk about this intro. You have some really great feedback in your playback here, so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later, or you'll see that a little bit later. But what was your first impression of the intro here?
Okay, the first impression I had was that I'm kind of reading the first few sentences, and I found myself thinking, I thought this was supposed to be about SaaS pricing, because this initial example that the writer presents is about this retail scenario where a business raised prices and then sold way more widgets, whatever they were selling. And I found myself thinking, okay, I kind of get the broader point you're making, which is that this company raised prices and sold more units. But I feel that it also set up this kind of awkward segue to be like, okay, that's retail, but we're talking about SaaS. Now let's talk about SaaS. And I was kind of like, as an editor, like I'm going to read the article anyways, but out in the wild, I think it might have lost me right there. Further down in the article, I found a thing which I called out was like, this is the thing, put this up higher. And this is the most interesting thing related to SaaS pricing, which is what this is supposed to be about, you know? So like this is a scenario where like, you know, say Jason and I are working together to get this article out the door. This to me, this is not a line edit situation. It's a jump on a call situation to talk about like, okay, imagine you're the reader. You're Googling, should I increase the price of my SaaS product? Or how do I let my customers know about a SaaS pricing increase or whatever it is? You land on the article. What's the biggest bomb we could lob at them at that exact moment? Like, what's the most interesting thing that we could share with them? I don't believe this is it. So like, let's brainstorm some other stuff, either that we pull from later on in the article, or that we, you know, maybe we have to go out and interview a couple SaaS companies that have done this. And like, let's find out what their experience was. And maybe we lead with an anecdote that we learned through that process, for example.
I love it. And then you had some feedback here. One of the processes that I use when I edit is I actually scroll through first and see the different images and headlines, subheaders that people are using, just to see if it grabs my attention on the scan. What was your first impression of this first real? I mean, you've got this image here, which you've kind of already said it feels kind of get rich quick. But when it comes to this graph, talk about this graph, but then also usage of imagery in general. How you feel about that?
My impression of this particular visual asset was that it looked cheap. That was my honest impression. It's like I have Sketch on my desktop too, and like I know that someone took a screenshot, opened it up in Sketch, added 28.5 ARR, and like called it a day. And I feel that it just conveys a certain tone to the reader, you know, like one of the things we did at Animals was we included a lot of visual assets. And I spent a lot of time learning how to use a tool called Sketch, which is like a kind of like a Figma competitor, so that I could make really polished on brand images, the right colors, the right fonts, the right everything, so that it felt very seamless. I never wanted it to feel like we kind of plopped something in the article. I wanted it to feel like a natural piece of the content that arrived at exactly the right moment, conveyed a very clear message to the reader, and just in kind of general, just like felt natural, and I just felt like this particular image didn't really achieve that. Same with the one above. Like in the comments, I think I left some notes about like my personal distaste for GIFs. I'm too old to know the difference in memes in content marketing, because I guess to me, like I just feel that readers deserve to be taken a little more seriously than that. And I feel like we sort of went through this phase where it was like, let's be more lighthearted and playful and kind of include these things. But it's like, that's not why they're here. You know what I mean? And what you mentioned about the get rich quick thing is that was sort of another thing I brought up about the intro that I wasn't a huge fan of, which is that I felt like the writer made it feel like too easy. And like, I know it's not that easy. And I feel like this image was sort of the primary indicator of that, which is like a guy throwing money. It just like didn't resonate with me.
Yeah. It's funny. Tracy Wallace was on our first episode, and she was talking the same thing about GIFs, which I know the guy who invented them says GIFs, but he's wrong. And what she was saying was that, you have to be really connected with your audience to know if that's even going to be appropriate.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And sometimes, it was a reference to Ted Lasso, which I guess I'm behind the boat. I don't know. I haven't watched Ted Lasso, so I didn't get the reference. But then there are all these things where you might alienate your audience if you're using an image that doesn't resonate. For example, this is anime, right? That's very subjective as to whether anime would even resonate with somebody. So that's something to just kind of consider when it comes to imagery overall. So okay, let's keep going. So we've got the best part here. Let's talk about this section because you have some really positive feedback here.
Yeah. I thought the best part really, like, it really was the best part. Like the situation, the real world case study that the writer talks about in here is that this company increased prices, didn't lose any customers, improves their profit margins. It's like, oh my gosh, this to me, this is like a wonderful story. And a lot of the rest of the article is about this, but I just felt that it took way too long to get there. And so what I sort of called out in the more in-depth edit was like, this is great. Let's get this up higher because we've kind of buried the lead. Like, this is really interesting. Why don't we swap this out? We'll have to tweak it, but why don't we swap it out with this intro about the retail environment, which kind of applies, but doesn't really. Like, this applies very directly. So like, let's get that up higher. It's going to capture attention more, and it's just far more contextual. Like, if a person's looking for SaaS pricing, here's a beautiful example. Let's just run with it.
I love it. And it actually plays into some of the feedback I usually give my authors, which is cut the first 300 to 500 words. And if we look here, we can see where you're starting to get to that point where, like, yeah, this is good. Quantifiably speaking, we're now 290 words into the piece, and it's like, yes, this is where it starts to feel like this is the best part, right?
Yeah,
at the 290 word mark.
Totally. I wrote an article which may be helpful for folks editing about, it's a very short article. It's called The Difference Between a First Draft and a Second Draft. I wrote it for my personal blog many years ago. And most of the article is actually just a visual, and it's a heat map of two articles. And in the first one, which is the first draft, the heat map gets darker as the article goes on. But in the second draft, the heat map is darkest up top and gets lighter as the article goes on. And like, to me, this article is sort of a good example of that, where like, if the darker the color sort of indicates like the more like interesting that piece of the content is, we always have to be moving that up, and that like warming up, that clearing the throat is, as an editor, it's really good to be able to identify that, so you can say exactly what you just said, which is, this is a warm up, get rid of it. And it's very helpful for the writer to go through that process in a first draft, but equally important to get rid of it in a second draft.
I've seen this too. It's and this is something that I've found with other authors that I've worked with in the past, and just in a lot of pieces that I've seen in general, is that it's not just that. It's not just the first few hundred words of the piece itself. It's actually kind of this roller coaster effect that happens after every subhead too. Have you noticed this in some pieces where it's like
Definitely.
you get this like peak and valley?
Yeah, definitely. It feels very sequential. It's like, from the writer's perspective, it's like, I wrote a subhead. Now I'm going to explain what's in this section. Here is the thing in this section. Here is the end of this section. Now I will write another subhead. And it's like, that's fine as you're sort of getting all the thoughts out of your head and onto paper, but you then have to apply this, like, the reader lens, and say, like, God, this is a nightmare to follow. Like, let's just pick out the good bits and keep that.
Right. As an editor, how do you break that pattern?
I would say one of the things that I would talk about a lot with folks I edit is the difference between writer-centric writing and reader-centric writing. Writer-centric writing is for you. It's how you get your thoughts out onto a page so that they can be organized later on. But I think it's very important for writers to understand the difference. Reader-centric writing is the polished thing that the reader ultimately sees. So it's like, I think sometimes writers try to go reader first from the beginning, meaning they want it to be polished from the get-go. And it's like, the longer I've done this, the longer I realize, like, I can't do that. I just got to get all of it out, and I'll organize later, So I now just label it like, what type of writing am I doing? Am I doing it for me, or am I doing it for somebody else? I'll do it for me first, polish it later. So it's like, as writers sort of grow in their craft, understanding the difference and then kind of coming up with their own process to, like, get it out, fix it, polish it is really important.
And from a practical perspective, talk about that on lead times, because obviously, as an editor, you have to, right? As the editor, you have to worry about publishing on a regular cadence. So how are you doing that? How are you balancing that with, getting stuff out on time?
We had what I think is a fantastic system at Animals, which they have written about, so it's not proprietary. Early on, we just kept coming in the situation where it was like, hey, can you edit this article? And then I would destroy it. And then the writer would say, this is actually due tomorrow. And I'd be like, why didn't you tell me that? I thought this was due next week and we had plenty of time to rework this, or whatever. Or sometimes it was the opposite situation. It's like, I'm giving like super light edits, being like, you need to really think the direction of this or whatever. And the writer's like, can you like fine tune this? Like, this is, we've got a due date here. So we borrowed this framework. I cannot remember who we borrowed it from, but it is cited in the article that Animals wrote about this. It's called the 30-90 framework. Mm-hmm. And so every article would go through 2 rounds of edits plus a copy edit. The first round of edit was called a 30, meaning that the article is roughly 30% done. So it means the due date is like at least a week out, and there's still time to like start from scratch if we have to, or to kind of like rethink the bigger picture or whatever. So when an editor would get their hands on a 30, they're not looking for grammar. They're not fact checking. They're not kind of like tweaking subheads. Like, they're just looking at the title, the intro, and kind of the gist of the piece, and saying like, either you're heading in the right direction, or, hey, hold on a minute, let's talk about this because it doesn't feel like it's going the right direction yet. And then when it would get to a 90, that means it's like roughly 90% done. And then at that point, we're like dotting I's and crossing T's, making sure it looks really polished, like any sort of last minute things are taken care of before it gets delivered. And that process was able to scale very well, because everyone was then always on the same page about kind of what stage this piece is in and what type of feedback does the writer need.
I love that because I know I've frequently found myself coming up to those situations where I'm like, oh, this could use an entirely new, like, it needs to happen. Like, how many times too do you find yourself going, I don't even know what I'm trying to say here. Like, are you publishing good enough, right? Or, you know what I mean? Like,
how
do you prevent yourself from publishing good enough?
Yeah. Gosh. Certainly in an agency, we thought about that a lot because we were sort of always, every piece felt like our reputation was staked on it in the early days. Um, and you know what? We delivered a lot of stuff late because we felt that it was more important to deal with a customer that was frustrated that it was late than a customer that was frustrated that the content wasn't good. Um, Over time, we solved that through better process and setting better expectations and sort of all these other kind of related, important, but kind of only sort of related things. I think honestly, the solution to that problem, to the publishing good enough stuff, is just to publish less. I think that a lot of companies get on the editorial calendar treadmill where they just like fill this editorial calendar up with stuff and then feel like they have to maintain whatever cadence they're on. And it's kind of arbitrary. Like no one's really forcing them to publish that often. So I guess one, publishing less. If you're not an agency, I would think you should absolutely just hold on until you can get it right. Agency setting is different because you're just sort of on deadline with every client all the time. The editorial, at least in my experience, editorial calendars are a little tricky. It's a double-edged sword. It sort of keeps you on the treadmill, but it's good for planning and visibility and stuff like that too.
How do you convince the boss to publish less?
You got to show the number. You got to prove it. I mean, this particular example, this kind of like editorial calendars drive too much content thing was part of this hypothesis about your blog is not a publication, So like when we would explain this to clients, for example, or I've had to make this pitch myself, is like, if we stay on this calendar, sort of here's the trickle down effects. Here's all the other things that are going to happen if we do this. So do you want me to spend my time doing all of these things, keeping the blog updated, writing shorter pieces, getting stuff out the door, even if I don't feel awesome about it? Or, do you want me to chase whatever the big number is, like what's the big number? MQLs, or whatever. Cause the number is certainly not number of pieces published. It's some kind of like important growth metric. So it's not, I don't know. I ended up making a whole course for Superpath about how to communicate to your higher ups about content marketing, because what you just asked is such a real world problem that people bump into. It's kind of like advocating for what you believe is right, keeping big, messy projects moving in the right direction, reporting on it so that you're continually telling like a positive narrative about it, et cetera, et cetera. So like it's it's kind of like a bucket of soft skills that you just have to develop if you want to grow in this field.
I think what's interesting about that too, and we're coming up on time here, so I want to kind of wrap this up in just a bit. But I think what's interesting about that is, I've cited a piece that Ryan wrote a while ago, and you've brought up a piece that resonated and kind of stuck out in my mind. Like, there's this idea of, do we need to publish for the sake of publishing, right? Or do we want to create things that are memorable, that we're really connected with? There are pieces that I've read, the years ago that hold the 10,000 true fans, right? Or 1,000 true fans, right? That's one that's memorable for a lot of people, and you say it and it's like, oh yeah, and it came out years ago. So I think that's an interesting thing to try and balance. I would love to have a link to the How to Talk to Higher Ups about that. We'll put that out in the follow-up here. We are at 2 minutes away. So Jimmy, you have an offer for people in the audience right now. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, sure. So we have an ebook. It is called 10 Advanced Content Marketing Concepts. It's not necessarily about editing, but it is a lot about some of these like kind of bigger picture concepts that I think, especially for folks who are sort of in that like mid-range of their career, where they're like eager to get into some of these leadership roles, they're thinking about management, they want to run their own strategies, that kind of thing. Like I think these 10 things are the things you should be thinking about. Right. It's for the folks who are kind of in the process of graduating from being mostly focused on content creation and are thinking more about like the business itself. So be happy to provide that ebook for free to folks. It also comes with an audio version read by yours truly. So if it's easier for you to just like put in your headphones and listen, it's like an hour long, sort of like a podcast. You can get the info that way.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that. And then for everybody who's left, I'm going to put in the tweet or the quote here down on the bottom. Would love it if you could give any feedback on the show, what you thought about it, and if there's anything that we can do better in the future. Thank you so much, Jimmy, for coming on, and thank you everybody else for joining live.
Thanks, Tommy. Great to chat.
Yep, absolutely.